بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر الخالق البارئ المصور الغفار القهار الوهاب الرزاق الفتاح العليم القابض الباسط الخافض الرافع المعز المذل السميع البصير.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الرحمن الرحيم. مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
Greetings, I'm Bilal Dannoun and you're watching Voice of Islam. You can also watch us online on www.voiceofislamtv.com.
The only way you will find the miracle of this book is if you come looking for it and you reflect inside this book and you dig and ponder into this book, then it will become clear this can only be from God. If you give it a shallow look, it will give you nothing. If you decide to dive in deep, I had a friend in college who was born in a Muslim family, but they're not very religious family. They sent him to college. He decided to do a bachelor's in philosophy. What happens after a bachelor's in philosophy? Your iman has a janazah. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So he's completely gone off the deep end. He's an agnost. He's a skeptic. He doesn't believe in anything. He's not even sure if he exists. You know, he's one of those guys. He's out there floating in space. And then he was challenged to ponder on the Qur'an. Just ponder over the Qur'an. And so he did. He brought all of his philosophical questions, all of his, from every ism you can think of, he brought to the Qur'an. And he just studied it for a couple of years. He just studied the Qur'an, asking it questions, hoping he can find something that can finally, philosophy can crush this book. But he kept getting defeated by this book. And you know, people that study philosophy love to debate. So when they lose a debate, they get really ticked off. Their ego is hurt. So they want to come back and crush it the next time. So he keeps coming back with more criticisms, but he's not arguing with a person. Who's he arguing with? This book. He just debated with this book. He used to literally slam it shut sometimes because it shut him up. He was looking for it. I bet you it doesn't have an answer for this. And he reads it. Oh, it's there again. I gotta find something else. And he would go back and forth, angry with this book. And 2 years later, he told me himself, I wrestled this book and it pinned me down. And I came to this deen. Yeah, I know. It pinned me down. This is la rayba fi. But it doesn't give itself for free. He could have been a philosophy student, read a translation of the Qur'an and say, nothing here, and move on. But if you decide to ponder, why am I saying ponder? That's not something I came up with. That's something Allah's own claim. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. Don't they then reflect on the Qur'an? Because had it been from anyone other than Allah, they would have found a lot of contradictions in it. By the way, if you study the Qur'an in a shallow way, you will find contradictions. Allah says if they reflect, they will not find contradictions.
Welcome to Let the Qur'an Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. We have come to the end of our mini-series on mathematical miracles in the Qur'an. Let's sit down with Dr. Shabir Ali to wrap up this engaging series. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So I'm going to share a secret with our viewers. Our impromptu mathematical miracles in the Quran was a mini-series in and of a series that we just happened to start while we were filming our bigger series of Qur'an, is it really the Word of God? How did that come about?
Yeah, so in the broader discussion, is the Quran the Word of God? There are several arguments that we have marshaled, and now one of the arguments is that there are underlying mathematical patterns in the Quran which are discoverable beneath the message of the text itself, and those mathematical patterns point to the divine origin of the Quran, because no human being consciously put these patterns in there. And we are just discovering them now, and in our present age, because we have computer devices with which we can easily search the Quranic text and see how many times a certain thing is mentioned, how many verses between the mention of this and that, and so on, and we're seeing the patterns emerge.
And I think we decided to do a mini-series as well, just because there was so much to share and discuss that it wouldn't do justice to just one mathematical miracle segment.
Yes, and even now that we have decided to wrap up that particular mini-series, I still have in mind much more that we could have said about this, but we didn't have time to mention in the series itself. But it's good that we're bringing it to a close, because the nature of the subject is such that not everybody is like math oriented.
Like me, yes.
Some people, in fact, hate math, and but for some people, especially many young people who are in the engineering and sciences and so on, when they hear this, they say to themselves, "Oh, wait a minute! I didn't think that a religious scripture could have so much going for it." And to them, this really means that the Quran is the Word of God. Many of them do take it very, very seriously. And to me, this is one of the strongest pieces of evidence we have today that the Quran is the Word of God. So it was worth doing it, but like every good thing,
must come to an end.
Yes, you don't want it to be too much of a good thing.
Well, I think the way we discussed it, someone like me who's horrible at math, and I don't like math, I was able to understand as well. So I think it appealed to the larger audiences. Can you give a brief recap of maybe some of the highlights that stood out to you in our discussions?
Yes, and basically we looked at patterns falling under a variety of categories. We looked at category one, not necessarily in this order, I'm just trying to go by memory here. Words used in the Quran a number of times, which the number itself is significant. We saw the several examples of that. And second, we saw that there are patterns pertaining to the number of chapters and the number of verses within each chapter. Third, we saw that there are patterns emerging that are in multiples of 19, things occurring 19 times, 38 times, 57 times, and so on, multiples of 19. Then we saw that there are patterns related to multiples of 7, things occurring in 7, 14, 28, especially 28, which we saw to be what mathematicians call a perfect number. And finally, we began to see that there are patterns related to the numerical values which in classical times were attached to each letter of the Arabic alphabet, as also were attached to letters of the Hebrew alphabet and Greek alphabet. But in dealing with the Quran itself, we saw that there are patterns related to the numerical values of the letters. And then finally, we can bring them all together by showing, in fact, that sometimes there are crisscrosses, there are interlacing patterns. Sometimes we have two patterns being observed at once, and we see an interconnection between them.
Do you think this particular segment that we did in the grander context of Quran, is it really the Word of God? Do you think this is one of the strongest points to help reinforce that?
Yes, I think so. And an example here may be pertinent. Let me think of an example which I probably didn't mention in the series so far. Though we talked about multiples of 7, what do you make of this? The first time that the word 7 is mentioned in the Quran is in the 2nd chapter in the 29th verse. So how many verses precede that in the chapter? 28 verses came before it in that chapter, and 28 we saw previously is what mathematicians call a perfect number, and there are only a few perfect numbers known to mathematicians, this being one of them. And 28, as we said, is also a multiple of 7. So there's 7 times 4 verses that came before this mention of the number 7. The first time it occurs in the Quran, in that second chapter. Now the last time the number 7 is mentioned in the Quran is in the 78th chapter, Surah An-Naba. Many Muslims would know it by the name. It begins, Amma yatasa'alun. And it's in the 12th verse. It's in the 12th verse. That's the last time it is mentioned. Now, there are 40 verses in this chapter. It's mentioned in the 12th verse.
Yeah.
And there are 40 verses in the chapter. So how many verses come after this?
After the 40?
After the 12. What, 28, right?
Yes.
So we're back to 28. But now, so we have 28 verses coming after that mention of the last 7, okay? And we saw that there were 28 verses before the first mention of the 7.
Okay.
So you see that there is a kind of fine balance here from the 28 verses before the first mention of the 7, or 7 times 4 verses before the mention of 7, and 7 times 4 verses after the last mention of the 7. Moreover, if you were to consider the distance between these two mentions in the Quran, first of all, we're dealing with chapters 2 and 78. And often in the Quran, when we're looking at distances between two things, the patterns that emerge are based on inclusive differences. We know that there's an exclusive difference and inclusive difference in math. So normally we're dealing with exclusive difference, right? 5 take away 3. That's the answer is 2. That's exclusive difference. But if we ask from 3 to 5, how many numbers are we dealing with? That's inclusive difference. So that means 3, 4, 5. We're dealing with 3 numbers.
Okay.
So what is the inclusive difference between chapters 2 and 78? It's basically 78 minus the first chapter. So that gives us 77. And 77, as you know, is a multiple of 7. 7
Yes.
are 77, right? So the distance between these two mentions of 7 in the Quran, from the first to the last, is 77 chapters, which is 7 times 11.
Yeah.
And also, if one were to calculate the number of verses from the first mention to the last mention, from chapter 2 down all the way to chapter 78, one will find that there are 5,000 and some verses, but it is exactly a multiple of 7.
Interesting.
Even though some 5,000 verses have been traversed here, someone has kept count to keep this. Not only the distance in terms of chapters is a multiple of 7, but the distance also in terms of verses is a multiple of 7. So this is remarkable. I mean, for this to be done and come out with all of these 7s emerging just by random chance, this seems rather remote. And to show the crisscrossing, previously we said that some words are used in the Quran a number of times that is significant. Here we find that the number 7 and all of its derivatives is mentioned in the Quran 28 times, as we did mention in the previous show. But now we're seeing that it crisscrosses with another pattern. Not only is the number of words, like the number of times the word is used, significant, but the places in which the word is used, the distance in terms of the chapters and verses, which was another category, now that too is significant. So we see the crisscrossing, the interlacing of two different patterns, which just increases the complexity of the whole phenomenon. And shows that to say it's by random chance, this is rather remote.
I know we didn't discuss this particular example. That's probably why my math is not great. But is there? I know you also mentioned earlier, if we were to do there's more to the series that you would have want to cover. So just briefly, what other, I guess, topical areas would you have covered if we had more time?
Well, if we had more time, I would mention some examples which we put in writing already in a brochure that's available on our website. If one goes to QuranSpeaks.com and look for the Mathematical Miracles brochure, one will find that many more patterns that we talked about there in that brochure, but we didn't have time to deal with in the show.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
He was extremely humble. Once a man from another tribe entered his tent to speak to him, and he was shaking because of his excitement at being in the immediate presence of a great leader. So the Prophet told him, Take it easy. I am not a king. I am just the son of a woman from the tribe of Quraysh who used to eat old dry bread. And a man once entered upon him and tried to kiss his hand. So he said, don't treat me like one of those kings. That was Prophet Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum everybody, a quick message from the team at Voice of Islam. Every time our show airs, we reach a potential audience in the hundreds of thousands. We bring the truth about Islam to non-Muslims and help Muslims learn more about their own faith. Every time something positive comes from Voice of Islam being on air, those people who have contributed and made the broadcast possible share in the potential rewards, inshallah. We really appreciate people donating what they can. Every little bit helps us meet the cost of broadcasting each week. We sincerely thank everyone who has helped us and continues to do so, and we look forward to more help in the future, inshallah. If you are keen to contribute, please visit our website for details of how to do so.
What would you do to someone who murdered members of your family, tortured your friends, and made your life extremely unbearable? When the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, conquered Mecca, he had the non-believers assembled before him. They were the very ones who for nearly 2 decades mocked, abused, tortured, and murdered his family members and friends. Do you know what he, peace and blessings be upon him, did to them now that they were completely helpless and at his disposal? He forgave them and freed them. Yes, you heard right. He forgave them and freed them. The very ones who had murdered and mutilated the body of his uncle. The very ones who were responsible for the murder of his daughter. The very ones who had tortured and mocked him and his friends and family. Freed and forgiven. If you find such incredible mercy hard to believe in, please go and educate yourself about the day known as the conquest of Makkah. This was the very nature of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, a forgiving and merciful nature. And this example, the day of the conquest of Makkah, is only one of many, many similar examples from his blessed life. Today, it is very unfortunate that there are people who try to paint a twisted picture of the Prophet of Mercy, peace and blessings be upon him, due to their hatred born out of being brainwashed by an extremely manipulative media and biased books written by people full of hatred for Islam and Muslims. The fact of the matter is, there is no one in history more merciful than the Prophet of Mercy, Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him.
This is Islam, the religion of peace, mercy, and forgiveness. Thank you, New Zealand, for your love and compassion.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
I was raised mostly on a farm, and although there was religion in our life, my earliest times I can remember would be as a Baptist. When we would go to Bible classes on a Sunday every now and again, but sort of in my late young life through for the rest until my later life, there was really nothing. I entered Catholicism and found that nice and structured, and which is something I'm pretty used to, and something I enjoyed. So that's probably how I entered my early days. I'm a serving army officer, which is pretty unusual, I guess, but there are others around the world, I'm sure. I served a lot of time in Southeast Asia. I had seen Islam in Southeast Asia, and my observations of Islam was really only the masjid, and so I came to recognise that as a sign of Islam, and hearing the adhan, and that was probably all I knew about Islam. And I served over in that region for about 6 years or so, around about that. Later on, through my tours over there, I became more interested and wanted to know more. Not only that, I met the woman who I wanted to marry, and her family was very religious. Her father in particular, a really nice guy. He's passed away now. So I spent a lot of time with him talking, and he took me into the world and really showed me a new world. And it was probably a world that crossed a gap that probably in my life was missing. And that's how I entered into Islam. And seeing and hearing some of the things that my wife's father talked about, it was just something that I needed. I had to do. I had to be part of it. And probably to me, the cement on the whole process would be not until sometime actually after I converted to Islam or reverted. It was actually here in Palmerston North. In my early days as a Muslim, most of it was spent on a posting cycle of every 2 years I would go to another location, and Islam was in none of those locations. There were no Muslims in any of those locations. I came to Palmerston North here, and one of our first ports of call was immediately to the masjid, and I met people here, and it was also very close to Ramadan, and the friendships and the closeness of the community just absolutely confirmed this is why. These are the fundamental things about Islam that make it such a beautiful religion. It is at times quite difficult, but I'll probably give you the highest end of the scale. Last year I served in Afghanistan, and I'm one, if not the only Kiwi service person to be a Muslim. We went over there, and Ramadan approached. My military colleagues in particular know what I am, know who I am, and certainly as we prepared to go to Afghanistan knew exactly what I was, because I helped them to prepare through their beliefs and things like that. Ramadan came along, and I actually thought, boy, am I going to really struggle here, because I'm carrying many kilos of equipment, of weaponry, of ammunition, stuff like this, and thought I'd never be able to survive through Ramadan without having a few breaks during the fasting. But actually, as compared to New Zealand, not this year but previous years, the days are reasonably short. But however, at the same time that I was fasting, I would be in villages and with people who were doing exactly the same, and they knew I was doing the same. So and people knew who I was. They knew I was a Muslim, and it was actually a big draw card for a lot of people to come and see this Kiwi Muslim, and particularly during Ramadan, to know that he was also fasting. So here we were out the back of their village. We'd been taken to, I can remember one incident in particular, a village where children had been tampering with big anti-tank rounds of ammunition, and they had been trying to poke the explosives out, and they were actually burning the stuff. None of it had exploded, but they were in a lot of trouble. So we were asked to go to the village, and they knew who I was. We were asked to go a significant distance out into the middle of nowhere to find this ammunition. We found it out there, and we helped carry it and position it so that it could be exploded. And then, of course, from way out the back of nowhere, we had to walk all the way back. We get back, and they do not offer me chai, the local brew, but all the rest of my patrol are offered chai. And there is just an understanding of Islam and the brotherhood, and that is such a big part of Islam to me. From, I guess, when people first become aware that I was a Muslim, and it's not through them one day finding, well, he's a Muslim now, boy, things have got to change. I explained the situation. I also explained my position within the community within Palmerston North here, and also my greater role within the Federation of the Islamic Associations of New Zealand. Actually, my employers and the New Zealand Defence Force as a whole are very supportive. They allow me time off, when special meetings are occurring, or when they know that I need to do things, because of course there is a dual role. Not only is it amongst my fellow Muslims, and we have a big community here in Palmerston North and the Greater New Zealand, but it's also within the New Zealand Defence Force. Here in Palmerston North, this community here has played quite a big role in preparing soldiers to deploy overseas, whether that be to Iraq or whether it be to Aceh following the devastating tsunamis there, or even my own team preparing to go to Afghanistan. So we provide, you wouldn't call it a service, but we also help the Defence Force. So my employers, the Defence Force, whether it be Army or the higher level Defence Force, are very supportive of what I do and provide me the flexibility to do what I need to do. As far as my everyday job goes, really the prayer times are not affected. There are lots of locations that prayer can be done. So that's just like any employer, it doesn't matter wherever you are. Food is pretty easy. I'm able to ask for a specific type of food, and once again, the Defence Force is pretty good on that. You know, in relation to the whole sphere of Islam and an employer, it is actually very easy. As long as you take the time to explain and you have an organisation who supports you, there are no issues. It is very simple. Within the likes of the police and the Defence Force, the ambulance service, all those specific jobs, there are roles. And there are roles because the Islamic community in New Zealand is very large. And if we have no, you wouldn't say a foot in the door, but if you have no brothers or sisters in any of those organisations, there are times when you actually need them to assist. And the police is certainly one of them. You know, I try to encourage here within Palmerston North, our own Ummah, some of our youth to look at it, because they have some very good educational qualifications, and it would provide I guess, a bridge between an organisation and a community, and it is no difference in the Defence Force, and we can see it simply by some of the missions that I've been on. Probably all of them have been to countries that have large Islamic populations. I was in Bosnia for a very short period of time, preparing for a mission that never actually went off in the end. However, you know, once again, having a Muslim with the actual force that is in there and is able to relate as well as the Kiwis do, and that's a trait that the Kiwis are so good at, to a population. Cambodia, I spent 13 months there, and there was a population of Muslims there that was almost wiped out completely by Pol Pot and his regime. And I made myself known there, and I mean, they never heard of New Zealand, let alone that we actually had Muslims. And latterly in the Middle East, I served in Sinai, in the peninsula between Egypt and Israel, and that was a real eye-opener. Certainly come out with some different views on a lot of issues after that. And of course, Afghanistan. The Muslim brother or sister can play such a big role in providing a bridge between an organisation and a community. And Auckland, I would say, would be one. Hamilton would be one. Wellington would be one. Christchurch would be another. There is nothing wrong with any of those professions. There is a bit of a stigma. The old top hand, heavy bully, you know, or we're out shooting rifles and shooting people sort of thing. That does not happen. All of the holy books teach really the same sort of things, except for some reason we don't apply some of them. The religion of Islam, I think, makes it very easy to follow the religion of Islam. The Qur'an and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad teach us and give us easy ways to follow the religion of Islam. So if I could just say anything, that the religion is, you know, to a degree structured, to a degree. It is, to me, a whole and complete religion that has everything you want. So if you want to take the time to find out about it, you will see everything that you ever wanted, providing you want to take the step to be as good as you want to be. If you want to sit back and do nothing, then you can do that. Or you can actually find out about a few of those things, and you'll see that it offers an awful lot. So to me, it offers a way of life, a complete way of life. It took me away from a lot of things that perhaps, you know, might have taken me down a path that I wouldn't want to have gone. But you know, I'm pretty happy with where I am right now. I don't think there's any conflict. Do I go to a game of rugby? Of course I do. I love a game of rugby. But however, do I go down to the pub with them afterwards? I don't do that. Do they know why I don't do that? They know why I don't do that. You know, the people who take the time out to learn about what we are and what we do, what our beliefs are, what we don't do, what we do, those are the people who I think that will go a long way. There is no conflict. There is absolutely no conflict. We are no different than anyone out there on the street, any Kiwi on the street, except there are some things we do differently. and the concepts of the open days that we have, Islam Awareness Weeks, all those sort of things just help build the bridge in the middle, because it's all about, you know, the fear of the unknown. If the unknown is taken away, there is no fear.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
It is impossible for a person who cannot read and write to inform about the Ghaib, unseen, unknown, and the information given by him to turn out to be right all the time. When we divide the Ghaib into two as future and past, it is not possible for someone to inform about the future at all. In order to give information about the past, that person must be literate and have to study works about the past if the given news is not well known, and not something that people talk about in their daily lives. However, you see someone who informs about the future though he is illiterate and cannot read a single sentence. He informs us about the past, and what he informs always proves to be right. So, can anyone be skeptical about the person who gives this information to be the Apostle of Allah, and the book in which this information is contained to be the word of Allah? No, never. For none can know the Ghaib except Allah and the person whom He teaches. In the second part of our work, which is about the Qur'an as being the word of Allah, we will show the trueness of the information that the Qur'an gives about the Ghaib and prove that the Qur'an is the word of Allah. We punished the people of Pharaoh with years of drought and shortness of crops, that they might receive admonition. So we sent plagues upon them, wholesale death locusts, lice, frogs, and blood. Signs openly self-explained, but they were steeped in arrogance, a people given to sin. Similar verses of the Qur'an of which one is given above inform about the calamities that befell Pharaoh and his community, and mention calamities that were sent to them such as drought, flood, frog, and blood. It is as follows. Allah Almighty sent an intense rain to the community of Pharaoh, who insisted on denial. The rain continued for 8 days and nights, and no one could get out. Floods occurred as a result of the overflowing of the river Nile and destroyed homes, crops, and animals. Upon this calamity, the people of Pharaoh came to Hazrat, Moses, peace be upon him, and said, "Pray your Lord, let him revoke this calamity so that we can believe in you." Hazrat Moses prayed, and the flood ended with the blessing of his prayer. However, they did not believe and insisted on their denial. Upon this, Allah Almighty gave them the calamity of locusts as a sign and miracle. The flocks of locusts which ate crops and the fruits reached up to the ceiling of homes as well as inside their clothes. Upon this calamity, once again they came to Hazrat Moses and wanted him to pray and let this calamity revoke, and said to him that they would believe in him if he would do so. Upon this, Hazrat Moses prayed again, and with the blessing of his prayer, a strong wind came and poured the flocks of locusts into the river. However, Pharaoh and his community, whose hearts were blackened, did not believe in this miracle either, and they broke their promise. Upon this, Allah Almighty sent them the calamity of insects. The insects ate the crops that remained from locusts and sucked their blood by entering their clothes. Hence they came to Hazrat Moses the third time and wanted him to pray and let him revoke this calamity, and said him that they would believe in him if they would do so. Hazrat Moses prayed again, and Allah Almighty destroyed the insects. However, once again, Pharaoh and his community did not believe in him, and said to Hazrat Moses, "You are a magician. You are doing magic." Upon this, Allah Almighty sent frogs over them. The frogs were so plentiful that their residences were filled with frogs. Pharaoh and his community, who could not escape from these frogs, could not find any other way but going to Hazrat Moses for their survival, and wanted him to pray and let these frogs be destroyed. In return for this, they promised, "This we will certainly believe in you." Hazrat Moses prayed again, and with the blessing of his prayer, a rain came and poured all of the frogs upon the sea. However, they did not believe in and continued their raunchiness. Upon this, Allah Almighty poured blood over them, and everything was drenched in blood, including their drinks. Here, the aforementioned verses of the Qur'an inform us about the calamities that befell Pharaoh and his community, and give us a lesson of warning. So, what do history books say about the events that the Qur'an informs? Now, let us listen to the historical scripts about this subject. The Ipuwer papyrus that remained from the era of Middle Kingdom was found at the beginning of the 19th century. After being found in 1909, this papyrus was sent to Leiden, Holland Museum and translated by Gardner. In this papyrus, calamities such as the drought, famine in Egypt are narrated, as well as the escape of slaves. Besides, it is clearly understood that the author of these aforementioned papyrus, Ipuwer, is the eyewitness of these events. The following is mentioned about the calamities in Ipuwer papyruses, which are also narrated in the Qur'an. Plague is throughout the land. Blood is everywhere. The river is blood. Forsooth, that is perished which yesterday was seen. The land is left over to its weariness, like the cutting of flax. Lower Egypt weeps. The entire palace is without its revenues. To it belong, by right, wheat and barley, geese and fish. Forsooth, grain has perished on every side. For 9 days there was no exit from the palace, and no one could see the face of his fellow. Towns were destroyed by mighty tides. Upper Egypt suffered devastation. Blood everywhere. Pestilence throughout the country. No one really sails north to Byblos today. What should we do for cedar for our mummies? Gold is lacking. Men shrink from tasting human beings and thirst after water. That is our water. That is our happiness. What shall we do in respect thereof? All is ruin. The towns are destroyed. Upper Egypt has become dry. The residence is overturned in a flash. While listening to the information written in papyrus that we were informed about in the 20th century, it is as if you are listening to the verses of the Qur'an, aren't you? The reason for this is that the information given in the papyrus is almost the same as the information in the verses of the Qur'an, and supports the news given by the Qur'an exactly. Now we are asking the following questions. Since there is a great similarity between the information of this papyrus that informs about the calamities that were sent to Pharaoh and his community, and the verses of the Qur'an, what can the explanation of this be, except the fact that the Qur'an is the book and word of Allah? Is it possible for a person who could not read or write to know this information by himself and inform people about it? No, this is not possible. A person cannot know this information on his own. Then the Qur'an cannot be the word of a man, but only the word of Allah, who is pre-eternal and post-eternal, knows anything that happened and will ever happen in detail.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of the Almighty be on one and all. Today we will be discussing another very, very important topic, and that is what we see around us. What do we see? We see a lot of things. One of them is everybody is running. Everybody is racing. Racing to do what? Racing to get more, to have the latest, to have everything the others have and even more and better, and to see who has the best and so on. This is more like a rat race, the race behind materialism. If we are to run behind materialism, materialism has no end. A lot of the times the example that people give is that of the mobile phone. We always want the latest, even if the phone we have does our job and it is good and it has been faithful to us, we still want to change it, we want to update it. Sometimes when we cannot even afford to have a mobile phone, and we would have it, we would borrow, we would live on that which is credit, in the sense that we owe people and we don't even have the means to own something and we want it. The same applies to a motor vehicle, where you have a person who has a car, they've barely afforded it, but they want another one. They want to update it, and they keep on updating it, and they look at the other one, and they want that one as well. And then they are never happy with what they have, because they see what others have. We are taught as Muslims, be happy with what you have. Look at what you have, concentrate on it, and thank the Almighty for what He has given you and for where He has placed you. And this is the contentment of the heart that is required by a believer. And we need to know, yes, if you can afford it very comfortably, then go to it. And maybe perhaps you are allowed to have it. But what you do need to understand, and I do need to understand as well, is that I need to tailor-make my life according to my budget. What I have is the budget. What I own is the amount that I have. I need to make sure that I buy that which I can afford. Why should I buy something I cannot afford? It is a burden on the shoulders. It is something that will bog me down. It is always a worry in the mind. Some people have, and we've seen this happening even in advanced countries, some people have lived on credit all their lives. So they have a job, the job pays them a good salary, their car is on hire purchase, the furniture is on hire purchase, the television on hire purchase, the computers on hire purchase, the phones on hire purchase, the furniture, everything on hire purchase. So much so that even their holidays are not yet paid for. And they've just swiped a card and it keeps on adding.
They did not calculate that one day we might lose the job. Then how are we going to pay for it? And this has happened. It has happened in the most advanced of countries. And we need to know that it can happen anywhere. And for this reason, Islam teaches us, don't live on credit. Live your life according to your means. If you cannot afford a holiday, don't go on it. Or go on a more basic holiday. If you cannot afford a mobile phone, don't have one. If you cannot afford a vehicle, go with public transport. It might be better for you. And so on. Yes, we should aim right at the skies. No harm in that. But do not pretend like you're living on a cloud when you have not yet moved above the ground. Because that will probably bring you crashing to the ground. And this is why we say the race towards materialism does not stop. It continues. The more we run, the faster it runs. So we continue running behind it and there is no stopping. Sometimes it even gets to our marriages. And this is a point that might be a red button being pressed, but we need to say it. When a person is used to changing everything, every time a new model is out, they want a new car, a new phone, a new watch, a new this, a new house, some people who are weak, it might even seep into their marriages where they no longer are interested in their own wives. Why? There is a new model out, so to speak. What does that mean? There is someone who wears a different type of clothing, who has a different cut, different likes, and everything is totally different, much younger and so on. We need to be careful. We should never allow this to seep into that department of our lives. And for this reason we say, harness it from the very beginning and you will be calm. You will lead a relaxed life. How many poor people do we have who sleep very well? And on the other hand, how many rich do we have who cannot sleep without a sleeping pill? How ironic. It should have been the other way around. But the reason is, sometimes the more we get, the more we want. And for this reason, the Almighty keeps us sometimes slightly backward so that we can enjoy our sleep. We can have a happy home. So many people, that when they've got enough money, enough time, enough good health, so to speak, they tend to think of sin. And they'd like to go and spend it in the casinos, on people whom they are not supposed to be spending it upon, spending nights out, engaging in adulterous affairs and so on, because they've got the time to do that, the wealth to do that, the health to do that. So as a gift of the Almighty, He sometimes keeps us less wealthy so that we don't even go there. He sometimes keeps us less healthy so that we don't have the health to do that. And sometimes He keeps us occupied so we don't have the time to do that. And we lead a happier home, a happier life, a happier family. Our children are always with us on our laps, having the meals with us and so on. Whereas you have sometimes those who have been given a lot, they don't have a meal with their children. Their children are distant. They have a relation with them which is very plastic, or should I say, very cosmetic. We ask the Almighty not to make us from those. Yes, there is an exception. There are those who are wealthy and they use their wealth in the right direction and they do not allow that wealth to develop, or should I say, to change in a negative way their character and conduct. Because sometimes what wealth does, it messes a person up. Or, to word it more correctly, as we've always said, wealth does not spoil you, but it gives you the opportunity to show who you always were inside. And I think we've explained this in the past. Like someone working for a boss, and his boss tells him something he doesn't like, he might be very upset, he wants to show it, but because he's not as wealthy, he cannot show it. So he says, yes sir, thank you sir, okay sir. But his heart is bubbling and bursting with all this, want to actually clarify and to answer back. He hasn't done it because of his standing. The minute he gets wealth, the wealth did not spoil him, but it gives him a chance to answer back and say, who do you think you are? If you have, we have as well. And for this reason we say, we need to have the best character and conduct prior to when we've had wealth, whilst we have the wealth, and even after it's gone. And when we remain humble, we won't suffer depression if we suffer a loss. The minute we live a haughty, high life, one thing goes wrong and we're depressed. Why are we depressed? Because we were running behind materialistic items. And we wanted to live a life that was compared to those higher than us rather than those lower than us. And for this reason we say, it is best for us to look at those lower than us so that we can appreciate the gifts of the Almighty upon us. Like we always say, if you don't have shoes, look at those without feet. And you will realize, at least I've got my feet, I might not have shoes. And this is just one example. In this way, there are so many examples. The youth out there, definitely the media plays a big role, a very big role, in convincing people to want things that they don't actually need. And this is why we need to distinguish between the wants and the needs. You need something, that is different. But when you want something, can you afford it? Is it necessary? Even if you can afford it, is it going to result in the destruction of your marriage, in the pushing away of your own children, or in the loss of respect, or in the changing of your habits in a negative way? If it is, leave it out. It's only something you want. You don't actually need it. You'd rather remain with that which you need and have an intact family with positive, relatives and family members and a good work environment and so on. That is much, much better than being a person who has everything, no friends, no family, nothing good in life. And this is why I repeat, and I'd like to end with this, there are many people who have really prayed for lots of wealth, and when that wealth came to them, it actually came to them with more negativity than anything else. They lost their family members, they lost their relatives, they lost their children, and they lost their sleep as well. Sometimes they lose their health as well. Do you know when you can afford food and you eat a lot of junk food and you eat a very, very unhealthy solely because you can afford it? Sometimes the Almighty does you a favor, you simply cannot afford it, and you don't know that the gift, or should I say, the side kick of that was that you would remain much healthier than those who could have afforded everything and did have it. So sometimes it's a gift of the Almighty. Let's become happy with the condition we are on, and let us learn to budget very carefully before we spend. Spend very carefully, don't waste that money, and remember, the needs come before the wants. Until we meet again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Mercy is what? Mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal that we see, that we have in our hearts. Mercy of every single bird that feeds its young ones. Mercy of any person who forgives another person. The mother has mercy on her young one because of that 1% of mercy. And every single creature, al-wahsh, even the beasts and the birds of the sky, each one has mercy on one another through this 1% of mercy. All of this mercy of every human being and jinn and creature on the whole of the earth, every single mercy you put together, that is only 1% of Allah's mercy that He has revealed to the earth. Allah has divided it into 100 pieces. And the 99 He kept for Himself for the Day of Judgment, and 1% He sent to this earth. Most of it has been kept for us for the Day of Judgment.
I always knew that this was going to be a step that I would take. At first I was a little hesitant because I knew things were going to change, but then I decided it was the right decision to make. So on the 1st of January 2004, my journey began, and I finally decided to put on the hijab. Every girl who puts on the hijab is faced with some sort of obstacle. For some, it's their families not wanting them to wear it. Others have self-esteem issues with it. Others face doubts about it. The challenge I faced was one that many others have also faced. Starting and going to a high school with hardly any Muslims, and where you're the first Muslim people have met, was no easy task. As teenagers, fitting in is the most fundamental thing in high school. Having no friends in high school is something every teenager tries to avoid. So I tried to be like them. Whatever the latest trend was, I went along with it. Not just that, but I needed to keep up with the latest beauty standards. Looking in the mirror for me was an exercise to try and pinpoint all the things wrong with me and that I needed to change. My self-esteem became dependent on the makeup I wore. On top of this, there was no way I could hide the fact that I was not like the other kids at school. I was embarrassed, and I would often ask myself why I needed to be so different. So I went about my high school life struggling with my identity, trying to answer the question of who I was really. The truth is, I felt extremely lonely. Looking back, the reasoning why I was so embarrassed of who I was because I had yet not fully understood the hijab. I thought the hijab was purely about modesty. I thought the hijab was there just to protect women from the gaze of men. But unfortunately, that was a very shallow and two-dimensional understanding of the hijab. It was not until I got to uni and started to take learning about my religion seriously that something happened. I fell in love. I fell in love with the hijab because I came to understand that it was not simply a piece of fabric draped over my body to conceal beauty and preserve modesty. It was a physical manifestation of my submission and connection with my Lord, an external representation of my inward spirituality. When I learnt the rationale for the hijab presented in the Qur'an, I was blown away. Not only did it shatter my shallow understanding of the hijab, it proved to me God had validated my beauty. Therefore, I need to make the most of the opportunities and blessings I've been gifted with. Knowing this has actually pushed me to constantly improve myself and ensure my actions and character are in line with the teachings of Islam. But we need to understand that by wearing the hijab, I'm not declaring I am Islam. Rather, I am a Muslim, meaning I am someone who is trying to follow this religion, who accepts it as the truth, sees beauty in it, and hopes to beautify myself with it. Ultimately, no one is perfect. As humans, we're susceptible to making mistakes. The hijab doesn't make you a more perfect or righteous human being. Rather, it's a constant reminder to keep striving and excel in your personal and spiritual development. Remember, no matter how dark the world gets, be like that star that stands out and shines the way for others to see.